Today is Sunday, March 16th, 2025. Breaking news coming out in the past couple of hours as we are hearing. Take a look at the latest headlines with me. Houthis have now vowed to retaliate against the United States after the rebel group says that U.S. strikes on Yemen have ended the lives of 53 individuals. They said, "We will respond to the recent escalation with further escalation." A Houthi spokesperson told NBC News, "Our response will not be delayed." This coming out, as I mentioned, in the past couple of hours today. I'm going to be sharing with you the latest video footage and headlines so that way you can see it for yourself as we're hearing escalations, threats of attacks are coming out. And we're hearing the United States is hitting right back. Donald Trump is not holding back. Let me share with you the more headlines so you can see it. Now, here is an update from Al Jazeera. This is an update from a live feed. Houthis say the United States has launched new attacks on Yemen as well. The Houthis say the United States has launched fresh strikes on Yemen. Earlier, the Yemen rebel group claimed an attack on the U.S. aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman after pledging to meet escalation with escalation following U.S. bombings on Yemen. The U.S. denied the vessel was hit, so they are still attacking ships back and forth. Now take a look at this. U.S. military shoots down Houthi drones as Trump's strike against terrorist group continues. Trump announced decisive and powerful military action against the Houthis on March 15th yesterday. And again, you can see these articles coming out today. Updates just in the past couple of hours. This one actually just about 2 hours ago. And we're hearing the U.S. vows to keep hitting the Houthis until these shipping attacks stop. The United States saying they will be relentless in their response. They will continue on to hit the Houthis. And take a look, U.S. and Iran-backed Houthis both vow escalation after airstrikes target rebels in Yemen. Both sides are saying they will not be backing down. Things will be escalating and increasing. And I'm going to share with you the latest video footage and articles. And as I've shared with you here on the channel, the Houthis in Yemen, they are actually backed by Iran. This is an Iran-backed proxy group that is responding. So we're going to see what unfolds here with Iran, with the United States, with the Houthis, as we're hearing that things are escalating and the United States right in the middle of this. Now, this comes as I shared with you yesterday. We had heard that the United States hit back as Donald Trump is also very upset as these groups have threatened to assassinate him directly. And also they are threatening Israel. Just 3 days ago, we had heard that they said that they would restart their attacks against Israel. And Donald Trump said, all right, it's time for the United States to hit back. And we're also tired of seeing them hitting our our ships in these various seas. And we cannot even pass through without attacks. So it is enough. And so the United States is hitting back, and we're hearing the Houthis are vowing retaliation, and the United States is saying expect the hits to keep coming because we're hitting right back. So let me go ahead and share with you the articles, the video footage. As always, I cite it. Link it down below like a book report. I cite the sources so that way you can rest assured and know that this is the latest information. You're going to be able to see the dates on these articles coming out in the past couple of hours. Today, March 16th, 2025. The sources, I put it on the screen, read right from it, play the video footage. And if you appreciate that, before we dive in, take a quick second, hit that like button for me. Helps out the channel a ton. Thank you so much. That simple gesture helps spread this out across the YouTube platform so more people can get the latest updates. Also, to stay up to date, totally free, why not? Hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and also consider joining the newsletter as I'm going to be having more exclusive content coming out through the newsletter. A lot of big updates coming out on Social Security, the Doge dividend checks, what's happening around the world. I'm going to keep you up to speed on everything. Join me at www.steveramnews.com. That's my name, steveramnews.com. But let's go ahead and get right to it. And I see people pouring in, putting in the comments. People are saying, you go Trump. And if you are glad to see Donald Trump addressing this very aggressively, the Houthis in Yemen, drop a 47 in the comments for Donald Trump. So let's go ahead and get right to it, though. I'm going to play some video footage for you so that way you can see what is unfolding here as we're hearing things are escalating and quick. This one's coming out from Live Now with Fox just a couple of hours ago. Says the Houthis now have threatened the United States after airstrikes in Yemen. And let me know your thoughts. Do you think that these threats are of a concern? And now we've heard that some of these groups, actually, I believe it was Hamas and some of the other ones, have been reported by the FBI as having snuck into the United States to potentially do various attacks with sleeper cells in the United States. Now, I believe that the threats, we're going to be hearing here what they say, are on the other side of the world over in the Middle East. But are you concerned about the threats coming from the Houthis? They're going to be discussing this in this clip and saying, is this a serious threat? Without a doubt, the United States outmans and outpowers the Houthis. But is this something that we should be concerned about? Are there things in the works that we're not prepared for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and let's take a look at the video footage so that way you can see it for yourself.
I do want to head out to a story we've been following very closely, and that is the latest on the war between Israel and Hamas. You are taking a live look over the Israel-Gaza border at this hour as the Israel Defense Forces says if the Hamas terror group does not agree to the terms of an extension of the ceasefire hostage release deal, the Israeli military will resume fighting in Gaza. At the same time, if you were watching us just yesterday, we brought this to you as breaking news, the airstrikes by the U.S. on the Houthis. Take a look at some of this video coming in from the Department of Defense. As far as Yemen's Houthi terror group says, it will, quote, meet escalation with escalation after this weekend's U.S. strikes that targeted the Iran-backed group. The terror group claims the U.S. strikes Saturday killed at least 31 people, and U.S. officials tell Reuters that this is just the start of the strikes that could continue now for weeks upon weeks. So a lot to kind of see how it plays out. The Houthis calling the strikes by the U.S. a quote-unquote war crime. As always, so much to discuss, so I do want to bring in Mark Chandler, Director of Government Relations and Professor of Practice at Coastal Carolina University, also a former senior defense intelligence official. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
You're welcome, Josh. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, first off, I do want to kind of go in reverse a little bit and talk to you about the U.S. strikes on the Houthis. We learned about that maybe about 24 hours ago here. What was the initial message that the U.S. was trying to send there? Because you could say that it was to target the Houthis, but was it also to maybe send a message to Iran?
Josh, I think you're absolutely right. We have a couple of messages that the U.S. is trying to send here. One, let's stop the Houthis and tell them that they should not resume their attacks. The second one is messaging Iran. And if I can break this down a little bit, you know, something that I have talked about over the last year and a half that you and I have been going over this conflict is a message of deterrence. And that is something that the Biden administration did very poorly. They did not try to deter Iran from future attacks or deter the Houthis. They kind of hit back. And I think as we see what's happening, there's been a lot of rhetoric coming out of the White House, but there hasn't been a lot of action. And I think what you're starting to see now is some action, and that is what you really need to establish deterrence. So who are we deterring? First off, if we recall, the Houthis about a week and a half ago said that they would begin striking Israel if Israel did not open up the corridors again. For aid going into the Palestinians and to Hamas. Then a week ago, they gave them a 4-day deadline, if you will. And so I think what you're doing is you're seeing the U.S. strike back or strike first before the Houthis can initiate those offensive operations. And so this was a very well-coordinated strike. It went in there and started to hit them before they could do it. And as a reminder, the Houthis have conducted almost 300 attacks against shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Red Sea, and about 150 of those on U.S. shipping. So that's trying to deter them from that and attacking Israel itself. Now, the second message, and the one that you keyed on, is the one to Iran. Also about a week ago, President Trump sent the letter to Iran saying, let's negotiate an end to your nuclear weapons program. And the Supreme Leader, I think right before we were on the air last week, he turned that down without a doubt. There's not going to be a negotiation. We're not going to do that. And then President Trump said, if you don't negotiate, you know, we could go to military escalation. And I think what this message shows right here to the Iranians also is that we can reach out at a time and place of our choosing and select the targets we want and do a precision campaign. And so that's what they sent this message to both of those parties out there.
And I do have to ask here, because we've talked about this situation, you and I, so many times here before, but that warning that was issued by the Houthis to the U.S. after those strikes, what does that say to you? Because is that really a warning, or do they fear what the U.S. could do? Because I have to imagine the U.S. has a much stronger military than the Houthi terror group.
Well, conventionally speaking, the U.S. absolutely outclasses the Houthis in military capabilities. However, I don't think one series of strikes is going to deter the Houthis. Immediately after the strike, they said they would attack, and they actually did attempt a missile attack a few hours ago. Now, that missile, it either failed or was intercepted because it landed on the Egyptian side of the Sinai. It looks like it might have been going against Eilat in southern Israel. That's down on the Red Sea port. It's a Red Sea port town in southern Israel. So it could have been going there, or it could have actually been going further up into Israel. So they have already attempted that. I don't know that they're going to stop, because they have been successful in other attacks against Israel. If you recall, they've caused damage and casualties in Tel Aviv itself with some long-range attack UAVs and long-range missiles that have gotten through Israeli defenses. So I think they're ready to attack. They still have the capability to attack if they so choose, and I think they will.
As the U.S., and again, you kind of already touched on this, but the U.S. weakening of the Houthis, is that happening right now? Because you said one strike isn't necessarily going to do it, but how strong are the Houthis maybe now compared to what they were a week, 2 weeks, months ago?
Well, if we look at this is a single strike. And so when I look at that, the last time they were hit was when the British, the United States, and Israel, all over a couple of days, struck a lot of targets across the Houthi infrastructure, a lot of missile storage facilities, UAV storage facilities, and command and control, similar to what was hit last night. So when you look at that, it's been 2 months. And I've been saying since that time that they're moving their equipment around. They're trying to get them in more protective locations, better bunkers, if you will, at that, and kind of resupplying themselves. There's also that resupply chain from Iran that is going to need to be interdicted seriously. So right now, there's a lot of battle damage assessment, BDA, being discovered, are being looked at by the U.S. intelligence community to see, one, how successful were we really against the targets we went to hit, and did we accomplish our objectives, like degrade, destroy, or whatever those objectives might be for a command and control or a missile storage facility. There should be another series of attacks. As you just reiterated, not one attack is going to stop them or weaken them. They fought a 10-year war with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, basically to a tie. And so they haven't been deterred throughout this entire war that's been going on with Israel and Hamas. So I would offer that a campaign, which is a series of days or weeks of airstrikes or missile strikes, needs to be conducted to truly weaken and take away the capability. They're not going to have the capability now to strike like they did at the height of their attacks against Israel or the shipping. But they can still negatively impact that commercial shipping, go against U.S. ships in the Red Sea, which right now there's a lot of targets for them, and then they can still hit Israel. So you're going to have to do a sustained campaign to really weaken them to the point where they're not going to attack.
I want to talk about the other developments, because if you look there on the left-hand side of your screen, that's a live look over the Israel-Gaza border. And I mentioned off the top here that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, says that it could resume attacks very soon on the Hamas terror group there in Gaza if the ceasefire hostage release deal is not extended. Now, of course, we know the U.S. does want phase 1 to continue, but Hamas wants to move on to phase 2. Do we know what is really holding up the negotiations, the deal now, or is that kind of a mystery?
Well, Josh, I can sum up what's holding this up in one word, and that is Hamas. If we go back to how this has played out, Hamas has gotten just about everything it has asked for in the negotiations up to this point. As a matter of fact, right now, what a lot of people don't realize is we're in a state of limbo between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 ended on March 1st. What Israel did at Hamas' request is extend a ceasefire through Ramadan, which began at the end of February and will end at the end of March. And so we're still in this ceasefire, but without any kind of promise or any kind of facilitation of additional hostage release out there. So Hamas is holding this up, and that's what they've done, from the beginning. And I think what they're doing is they're using this to position themselves for a military action out there. I mean, all Israel wants to do is extend phase one, the exact same agreement with phase one, and get more hostages released. Hamas wants some Palestinians released and move through that. Hamas refuses to do it, and I think they're going to try to play the U.S. off of Israel, and I can discuss that later. But really what you see right now is you see two sides both ready to resume fighting at a very intense level. It's like I have two people with their fingers on the triggers, and they're just waiting to pull those triggers.
As far as the talks go, that obviously is continuing here and will continue, I guess, for a while. But we did learn earlier on this week that Hamas had spoken directly with the U.S. It was apparently a one-time conversation. But what's interesting is that they did agree to release the last living American hostage along with 4 other hostages who were pronounced dead there. But what is the reasoning behind that? Do we know what exactly was offered in exchange? And do we actually think that is going to happen, especially with all of this kind of up in the air?
Well, Josh, I would say the last 48 hours have really put this part up into the air of the release of the hostage, the American hostage, and the 4 bodies. You brought up an interesting point. The U.S. and Hamas talked, and they did that without Israel. And I think what Hamas did, and that was, and I'm going to call this out, that was a mistake that the U.S. made to conduct one-on-one discussions with Hamas. I think maybe some naivete on the U.S. part to understand true Hamas motivations. And so Hamas is actually trying to drive a wedge in between the U.S. and Israel. And that's what you see played out this week. Hey, we're going to release, Hamas says, an American hostage, and we'll release the 4 bodies. And so America says, okay, that's good. But now we want to backtrack off of one-on-one negotiations and bring Israel back in. And so now we need to move forward, as holistic negotiations for the ceasefire. And that's where Hamas is balking. And that's where, as I said, they're playing one against the other in this ceasefire. I think right now, unless we see a change, the release of the American hostage is in jeopardy over the next couple of days. I hope I'm wrong, but I kind of see that's how we're playing out there. Hamas is asking for too much. They're asking for Israel to completely withdraw from the Gaza Strip, especially the critical, strategically important Philadelphia corridor down at the south. And Israel knows what Hamas is doing militarily, and they don't want to give away military strategic positions out there. And so that's a non-starter. Hamas knows it is. Hamas can come there and stop this right now if they want to, but they're still trying to play, as I said, both ends against the middle in this situation. Unless something breaks in the next few days, Josh, I'm worried that we are probably at the most critical point of this ceasefire, and it's ready to fall apart.
And Steve Witkoff actually said not only is it a non-starter, but he mentioned that it was essentially an insult to the Trump administration. So we'll kind of see how that does play out here. Kind of switching gears, because we had the Houthis, we've talked about Hamas, but really briefly, I want to talk about the Hezbollah terror group. Where do things stand there? That ceasefire, I know they're still fighting back and forth, but it appears that the ceasefire overall with Lebanon is still pretty much intact, fragile, but intact.
Well, Josh, you summed it up perfectly right there. Leave this interview with a positive spin, a positive note, actually. This is a success, relatively speaking. There is fighting. It's limited fighting. As a matter of fact, Hezbollah moved yesterday. They looked like they were going to conduct an operation. Israel went in and immediately struck them with an attack UAV, eliminated those Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon. This has been holding the way it is. It's been holding rather well since the end of November. So I think there is a bright spot here. The Lebanese government has allowed, although it's a tenuous allowance, if you will, Israel to stay in southern Lebanon in 5 strategic locations that Hezbollah used to attack Israel. So I think with this moving forward, this is a bright spot. Now, having said that, if open fighting and it escalates and breaks out very heavy between Hamas and Israel, I would expect to see Hezbollah even though they can't mass an attack the way they were at the height of the fighting, I do see them trying to offer some sort of sympathetic attack from the south, from the north, at least to show some sort of emotional support, if you will, to Hamas if fighting breaks out again. But right now, we're sitting pretty well with Hezbollah and Israel.
All right. Mark Chandler, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help discuss all of this further.
There you have it, you guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. As they said that there could be retaliations. They actually did see the Houthis immediately try to get some attacks in, and we're hearing that they are vowing to attack more. Now, let me know. I asked this in a poll in the comments. Are you concerned about the threat, the vow of retaliation against the United States by the Houthis? If so, put yes. If no, put no. Let me know your thoughts. And as you heard them say, they don't have nearly as much manpower as the United States, but there is concern that these groups, they could still try to put something together to hit the United States. It could be overseas. We've heard the warnings. You heard them talk about Hamas and Hezbollah, about some of these groups coming over to the United States, entering our borders over the past 4 years with sleeper cell groups in the United States. Now, somebody mentioned this in the comments that the border is a lot more secure and we have a lot more under control now with ICE, but they still could be in here already from over the course of the past 4 years. Let me know your thoughts. Are you concerned? Yes or no in the comments. And while you put yes or no, don't forget, take a quick second, hit that like button for me. Help spread this out further so more people can get the latest updated information. Now, in addition to that, another one coming out just a couple of hours ago, as it says, unrelenting. Trump official sends a clear message to the Iran-backed Houthis. Let's go ahead and take a look.
And we begin this Sunday morning with President Trump's new message to Iran, with the commander-in-chief ordering a powerful and deadly attack against Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen over the weekend. Multiple rebels dead after the strikes hit the intended targets in Yemen's capital city on Saturday. With President Trump writing on Truth Social, the Houthis have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against American ships, aircraft, and drones. Your attacks must stop starting today, and if they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before, writes the president. Trump also sending a direct message to Iran, warning the Iranians not to support terrorist proxies. The president following up after breaking news on this program last week that he sent a letter to the supreme leader of Iran asking to open up talks regarding Iran's nuclear ambitions.
I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
You wrote a letter to the Khomeini,
yes.
the leader? When did you send the letter?
Yesterday.
And you said you better negotiate, or we want you to negotiate?
I didn't say you better. I
okay.
said, I hope you're going to negotiate, because it's going to be a lot better for Iran. And I think they want to get that letter. The other alternative is we have to do something, because you can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
Those comments sparking a response to the interview from Iran last weekend, with the supreme leader saying Iran would not be bullied, writing, the insistence of some bullying governments on negotiations is not aimed at resolving issues, but rather at asserting dominance and imposing their demands. The Islamic Republic of Iran will certainly not accept their demands, writes the Ayatollah Khomeini. Joining me now with more on the Yemeni attack, Iran, and the president's agenda is the nation's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Mr. Secretary, great to see you this morning. Thank you for being here. Can you tell us how it all went down on Saturday?
Well, it all went down because an era of peace through strength is back. Just like in his first term, President Trump had to deal with the weakness of President Obama and get rid of ISIS, and he did it more quickly than anybody else. We're sitting on 4 years of deferred maintenance from Joe Biden, where, in particular, when you talk about the Houthis, they were allowed for over 100 times to shoot at U.S. Ships, to shoot at commercial shipping. 4 months ago, when we sent a ship through, it was shot at 17 times. Ships haven't been able to go through for over a year without being shot at. Freedom of navigation is basic. It's a core national interest. And President Trump has said, we will restore that, and we will be unrelenting. I want to be very clear. This campaign is about freedom of navigation and restoring deterrence. The minute the Houthis say, we'll stop shooting at your ships, we'll stop shooting at your drones, this campaign will end. But until then, It will be unrelenting. We got the reports last night, Maria. The Houthi capital felt like an earthquake. Dozens and dozens of precision heavy munitions dropping precisely on the targets that we wanted to hit, sending a very clear message. And the message is clear to Iran as well. And the president said it in his truth. Your support of the Houthis needs to end immediately. We will hold you accountable as the sponsor of this proxy. And I echo his statement. We will not be nice about it. This is not the Biden administration. The message is clear. We will come after the Houthis until they stop shooting at our ships, and the Iranians better stay out of it.
And there's so many implications to this. I remember last year when this was happening, basically every day or every other day that our ships would get harassed by these rebels. And what ended up happening from an economic perspective as well, many commercial ships were afraid to even go into that route in the Red Sea. They were going around the Horn, and it was costing much more money, sending oil prices higher because it was much more expensive for the longer travel. So it's not just a national security issue, but an economic one as well.
100%. And the president understands that. Global shipping, global commerce, when it's threatened by effectively pirates and piracy, and you have to divert and go an extra 2 weeks costing millions and then eventually billions of dollars, you're being held hostage by a terrorist organization. Remember, the Biden administration took off the foreign terrorist organization designation of the Houthis.
That's right.
President Trump restored it. We're squeezing them economically. We are pounding them militarily. By the way, to the Houthis, this isn't a one-night thing. This will continue until you say we're done shooting at ships, we're done shooting at assets. We don't want a long, limited war in the Middle East. We don't care what happens in the Yemeni civil war. This is about stopping the shooting at assets in that critical waterway to reopen freedom of navigation, which is a core national interest of the United States. And Iran has been enabling the Houthis for far too long. They better back off.
And enabling the Houthis, but also Hamas and Hezbollah. Secretary, assess the capability and the capacity today of these Iranian proxies. I'm talking about Hezbollah having become weakened in the last several months. Hamas weakened as a result of the Israeli strikes. What can you tell us about the capacity of these Iranian proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and now the Houthis? What is their state today?
Well, Maria, Iran is in a very weakened state. When you mentioned it, Hezbollah, you mentioned it, Hamas. You look at what happened in Syria with the collapse of that regime, which was a client state of Iran. And ultimately, a lot of their insurgent groups in Iraq have pulled back as well. But it doesn't mean they still don't have the desire. Their air defenses are weakened, and that's why they're in a position where they're supporting groups like the Houthis, because they, in some ways, have to move to other options to try to agitate and instigate in the region. This is a critical moment for them, and the president said it on your program. He said it very clearly. They will not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. We hope they do so, that we give it up peaceably through negotiations. The president has laid out the trajectory for that. Because the alternative doesn't look good for anybody.
I feel like we've been hearing that Iran is close to having a nuclear weapon. We're a month away, 2 months away. We've been hearing this for years. Realistically speaking, Secretary, how close is Iran from developing a nuclear weapon in your view?
Well, that's something that's classified, something we guard very closely, we watch very closely, and that's why the president has such urgency on this, why he's leading on this. Nobody wants a military option as it pertains to Iran. So he is, through maximum pressure, just as he did in his first administration, maximum pressure bankrupt the Iranians. Well, under Joe Biden, what happened? They took off that maximum pressure, and groups like the Houthis were awash in cash. Then they got arrogant, started shooting at our ships. We look weak. Not anymore. Not under President Trump. That will stop. The Houthis shooting at our ships will stop. Iran must get that clear message and negotiate the end of their pursuit for nuclear weapons. Because, as I mentioned, President Trump has said clearly they will not get a bomb.
And I know that the Department of Defense sent a letter to the Chairman Rogers, recently about this 8% budget relook that you have called for, Secretary. And I want to get your take on that because President Trump was very clear with me last week. He is not cutting defense spending. Here's the president with me last week right here. You said you wanted to do the Golden Dome. You've got a lot of ideas for America. But then earlier you said you wanted to cut $1 trillion in defense spending, right?
I didn't say I was.
You did not get it. So I was like, which is it? Are you cutting defense spending or are you building us up?
I never said defense spending.
Okay, because I think you were talking about denuclearization.
Correct.
And that's where the cutting of the spending came in.
I never said cut. No, it's not in these days. I'd love to cut defense spending, but not now. Because you have China, you have Russia, you have a lot of problems out there.
So, Secretary, the letter that was sent to Chairman Rogers was talking about the fiscal year 26 budget request, perhaps incorporating that 8% decline there. If you're looking at an increase in defense spending, Secretary, how do you allocate that? Where are the needs in our military? I know we don't have enough ships, and the Navy in China is actually dominating us when it comes to the number of ships. But how do you allocate that increase in defense spending?
Ships, shipbuildings, the long-range munitions, hypersonics, long-range drones, Golden Dome, southern border. The president has laid out very clearly his agenda to rebuild the U.S. military. He did it in his first term. He's going to do it again. This 8% has been highly mischaracterized, Maria. It's not a cut. It's a reallocation away from Biden priorities toward Green New Deal stuff, toward President Trump priorities. So we have revived the warrior ethos inside the military. We're reestablishing deterrence. And per the president's direction, we're going to rebuild the military. You're going to see a historic investment in the weapons and modernization required to stand up to our enemies. President Trump is committed to that. He's asked me to be a part of it. We're going to work with Capitol Hill to do it. But we're going to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars, Maria. We're going to pass an audit. We're going to work with DOJ. We're going to find there's plenty of waste, fraud, and abuse in the DOD, and we're going to find it. At the same time, we're going to reinvest overwhelmingly in systems and rebuild this military because our kids and grandkids require it, and President Trump's leading the way.
This is very important clarity that you just gave us. This is a reallocation, not a decline. Secretary, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Maria.
There you have it, you guys. And you heard him say that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And you heard her ask, how far away are they from having it? She said, we've been hearing they're weeks away, months away, for years. Where are they actually at? And he said, that's classified information. We can't let you know that, but we have said that we will not let them accomplish this. They cannot, under any circumstances, have a nuclear bomb. And we actually heard before in a previous report that I shared with you yesterday that they were concerned that if they actually did get their hands on this, that essentially they would be like North Korea. But then also Iran having these proxy groups, Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, then they essentially could use that if they wanted against Israel or the United States, these rebel groups that are backed by Iran, if Iran has their hands on nuclear bombs. So they are very concerned about them taking that next step, enriching uranium to the point where they could have nuclear bombs. So this is a major concern. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Now, in addition to that, as I mentioned, the threats are prevalent right now. As I mentioned, the past couple of hours, take a look. Houthis vow to retaliate after rebel group says U.S. strikes on Yemen ended the lives of at least 53 people. We will respond to the recent escalation with further escalation, the Houthi spokesperson told NBC News. Our response will not be delayed. Now, this article coming out today, you can see a couple hours ago, says at least 53 people have lost their lives and 98 injured after the United States launched a series of airstrikes on Yemen on Saturday. This coming out according to the Houthi Health Ministry, as a rebel spokesperson told NBC News that the group would respond with more escalation. President Donald Trump said he ordered the airstrikes on Houthi-held areas of Yemen on Saturday and promised to use overwhelming lethal force until the rebel group ceased attacks on shipping along a vital maritime corridor. The Houthis, an Iran-backed militia that has taken over parts of Yemen, including its capital, Sana'a, began launching missiles and drones and pursuing other attacks against shipping vessels in response to the war in Gaza. The group reported explosions Saturday evening in the city, the Houthis' stronghold near the Saudi border. Footage broadcast on Yemeni TV and published by the Associated Press showed vast destruction, with people searching for survivors as a bulldozer shifted rubble and ambulances arrived at the scene of the wreckage. Photos showed black smoke rising over the capital's airport complex, which includes a military facility. Strikes were also reported in Hodeida, Baida, and Marib. The attack came a few days after the Houthis said they would resume attacks on Israeli vessels sailing off of Yemen in response to Israel's latest blockade on Gaza, which has halted the flow of aid into the enclave. There have been no reported attacks since this threat was made. Now, Nasser Eldin Amir, a spokesperson for the Houthis, told NBC News on Sunday today that most of the casualties from the airstrikes were women and children, which NBC News has not independently verified. Amir said that the Houthis would continue their operations until the blockade on Gaza is lifted. We will respond to the recent escalation with further escalation, he said. Our response will not be delayed. Trump also warned Iran to stop supporting the rebel group and promised hold the country fully accountable for the actions of its proxy Houthi group. Tehran supports the Houthis with money, training, and equipment. Now, in a statement to Iranian state media, Hossein Salmani, the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, said Iran would respond decisively and destructively to any enemy taking threats into action. Jorge, thank you so much for the $5 super chat. I appreciate that a ton. I will continue to keep you up to date. Now, but Salami also distanced Iran from the Houthis, emphasizing that the group made its strategic decisions independently. The Islamic Republic of Iran plays no role in shaping the national or operational policies of any resistance front group, he said, in remarks that could be interpreted as a signal that the Houthis are on their own. An annual $1 trillion flow of goods passes through the Red Sea. The Houthis have targeted over 100 merchant vessels with missiles and drones, seeking 2 vessels and ending the lives of 4 sailors during their campaign targeting military and civilian ships between the start of Israel's war in Gaza in late 2023 and January of this year, when the current ceasefire took effect. Some shippers responded to the attacks late last year by suspending service in the region. Earlier this month, Secretary of State Marco Rubio redesignated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. The designation had been revoked by Joe Biden's Democratic administration over concerns that it would badly affect the delivery of aid to Yemen, which was considered to be facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. So there you have it, you guys. This coming out from NBC News. The Houthis are vowing retaliation against the United States for the strikes. And here you can see from the live feed updates, the Houthis say the U.S. launched new attacks against Yemen, and we are hearing the U.S. is shooting down Houthi drones, and they are striking the Houthis right now, and both sides are vowing that this will not stop. There will be retaliation as the U.S. vows to keep hitting the Houthis until shipping attacks stop, and U.S. and Iran-backed Houthis both vow escalation after airstrikes target rebels in Yemen. Now, I've also got some more video footage. Let's go ahead and take a look so you can see the latest coming out on this in the past couple of hours.
National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was on that program, detailed the latest on what's coming, what's happening there in that region.
Move to the airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. Officials called this an opening salvo for the attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, but it followed the president reaching out to the Ayatollah, basically trying to restart talks on their nuclear program. Netanyahu's been pushing for the U.S. and Israel to do a joint operation on Iran's nuclear facilities, and the Ayatollah rejected the president's request for talks. Is that kind of a joint operation under consideration now?
Well, let's talk about the situation that we inherited in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. We have not had a U.S. warship transit that area in over 4 months. We haven't had a U.S.-flagged commercial vessel in over a year. 70% of global shipping has been diverted from 2 of the world's most strategic waterways, adding cost and complexity to global commerce. That's what we inherited. The president has decided that's completely unacceptable, but we're not going to do what the Biden administration did in terms of this kind of pinprick back and forth. We hit the Houthi leadership, killing several of their key leaders last night, their infrastructure, the missiles. This is essentially al-Qaeda with sophisticated Iranian-backed air defenses and anti-ship cruise missiles and drones that has attacked the entire global economy.
Okay.
President Trump showed leadership, and we just hit them with overwhelming force and put Iran on notice that enough is enough with its backing of the terrorists and providing them the most sophisticated weapons that have attacked our warships dozens and dozens of times. All of that alongside an offer of diplomacy in terms of all options are on the table for their nuclear program.
All right, just listening in there to Mike Waltz earlier today on Fox News, talking about the sophistication of this Houthi group, the Houthi rebels there in that region. And of course, this is a message not only to them, but also to Iran. And we're also learning more information since those airstrikes were carried out early on Saturday morning. This a post from Fox News' Lucas Tomlinson saying that the U.S. warships have shot down about a dozen Houthi drones targeting the Truman strike group since the airstrikes last night. This according to a senior defense official. The drones were shot down well before they posed a serious threat, the official added. And of course, these airstrikes come days after the Houthis said they would resume attacks on Israeli vessels sailing off Yemen in response to the latest blockade by Israel in Gaza. All right, let's continue on with this conversation. I want to bring into the conversation Vice President for Foreign Policy with Jinza, Blaise Mistal. Blaise, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox for the latest. What do we make of this latest round of airstrikes by the U.S. against the Houthis, and what type of message is President Trump trying to send?
Well, good afternoon, Andy. It's good to be with you. I think this action is long overdue. And National Security Advisor Waltz was absolutely correct when he said that the situation in the Red Sea has been unacceptable. If 2 years ago you had asked any U.S. national security official if the U.S. could accept a ragtag group of terrorists using basically flying lawnmowers to stop maritime traffic going through one of the most important areas in the world, an area through which 10% of all global energy and something like 30% of all commercial container traffic goes through, everyone would have said that is not acceptable. That a fundamental interest of the United States, a reason that we have the Navy and the military that we have, is to protect the global freedom of navigation, to make sure that energy and commerce can flow around the world, because we benefit from that. And yet that's exactly what we allowed to happen for the last 18 months, is this group of terrorists to divert billions and billions of dollars of commerce through a crucial waterway. And the Biden administration did very little about it. There was a handful of pinprick attacks by the Biden administration that hit maybe some weapons storage facilities, maybe some logistics hubs, but did very little damage to the Houthis. And then it's no wonder that this group kept on firing at both commercial ships and U.S. vessels. And so putting a stop to this is absolutely important. But the question is, what is the Trump administration strategy here? How do they plan to get the Houthis to back down? Heavy strikes going after the Houthi leadership is obviously a major advance from what we saw the Biden administration do. But we haven't really heard yet what is the plan? How do they think they're going to win this? How are they going to make the Houthis back down?
Yeah, and we'll get into that. What's next? Big question in just a little bit. I do want to ask you about that, how this is different from the Biden administration, because we have seen a different tone as they also designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. This, a post from Mike Waltz, who we also just saw on Fox News during that segment, talking about President Trump taking decisive action against the Houthis to protect American personnel and assets. Biden's feckless leadership emboldened the Houthis. In terms of this, you mentioned the little small airstrikes by President Biden versus what's going on with Trump. Can you decipher a little bit and give more understanding on how they are different than what we saw in the previous administration?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple differences that we're seeing so far, and we're about 48 hours into this. The first is a preference for offense over defense. The Biden administration mostly deployed U.S. military assets in and around the Red Sea to try to stop, that is, defeat the drones and the missiles that the Houthis were shooting at ships going through that area. And that meant that we were shooting missiles that cost millions of dollars to try to take down drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars, which is a very costly and ultimately losing proposition. But that was mostly the Biden administration's approach. Try to defend the ships going through there. Occasionally, there were limited strikes that went out of their way, usually to avoid killing Houthis or civilians, mostly targeting what was believed to be empty infrastructure. And right afterwards, the Biden administration would always say, we don't want to escalate. We don't want this conflict to get wider. And so a big difference here is both the severity of the strikes that we're seeing from the Trump administration, the targets that are being hit. We've heard that there is Houthi leadership that are being targeted. That is a big change. But also the messaging. Whereas the Biden administration always said, we don't want to hit you. We want to back down. We want to resolve this. We don't want to escalate. We've heard President Trump saying, we will let hell rain down on you if you don't back down. So there's also a difference in tone and suggestion of what comes next. But I think that is ultimately the question. What does come next? The Biden administration didn't have a plan. It was an attack here, an attack there. There was nothing that really made sense. And so are we just seeing one weekend of strikes, or is this going to be a continued campaign? Is there a plan on what to hit to really make the Houthis hurt? I think that is the question now.
Yeah, and of course, the Trump administration, President Trump and the White House have said that they will continue these attacks until they cease the attacks, the Houthis attacks there in the Red Sea. So like you said, the plan of what comes next. And of course, Mike Waltz also alluding to the fact that Iranian targets might be next in Yemen. Do you see that as a real possibility?
Yeah, I think that is the big question here. Is this part of, or rather, is this just a campaign against the Houthis and the Houthis themselves? Or is this a campaign against the broader Iranian terror network that has funded and supported war across the Middle East, in Gaza by Hamas, in Lebanon by Hezbollah, in Syria by Assad, and by the Houthis in Yemen? We know that those first three have been dismantled by Israel and by others. The Houthis are the last remaining piece of this. It's one thing to go after them, but then the question is, what about taking this back to where it all starts? What about taking this back to Iran? Are we actually going to deal with the source of the problem in Tehran, or are we just going to try to take apart its network? And I think that's what we're waiting to see from the Trump administration. And I think it's very possible that this is actually part of a broader strategy. We know that President Trump has offered to negotiate with the Iranians, but also said, if you don't negotiate, we're going to come after you. And I think this might be part of sending that message to Tehran, that he's willing to use force and he's willing to go after them.
Yeah, and this comes after the negotiation tactic by President Trump to try to have a deal, a negotiation about those nuclear arms that they continue to enrich the uranium. I do want to ask you about this region because you mentioned just the critical nature of the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. This is a post from the White House as this were the airstrikes were happening. I do want to ask you, so 25,000 merchant ships go through it, $1 trillion through the Red Sea annually. We've seen it in the past where the U.S. Navy has to escort different merchant ships through the Red Sea. Do you think that is something that could happen if the Houthis do not cease to make these airstrikes on different vessels there?
Yeah, well, I think what we've seen over the course of the last 18 months is that commercial traffic has really dried up. And instead, what you're having is ships, instead of going through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, they're taking the long way around, going down south around Africa and back up on Africa's western coast to get to Europe, to get to the United States, adding time and something like $1 million in cost to every ship that has to go around the Red Sea. And I think that's likely to remain the case as long as the Houthis are there. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Trump administration is doing this, because they understand the threat, not just to shipping in the Red Sea, but the message this sends to China. If a bunch of terrorists can do this in the Red Sea, what are the ideas that China is going to get about what it can do in the East China Sea? And that's, I think, also part of this calculation is sending a message to not just the Iranians, but also the Chinese.
Yeah, and we look at this all in the whole scope of things because there's so many different factors and facets around it. I do want to get back maybe to the premise of this initial attacks by the Houthis is the fact that they are responding to Israel not allowing aid into Gaza. What does Israel play in this role? What role do they have if they opened up more aid to Gaza? Do you think the Houthis might back down? What is Israel and what can Israel do in this scenario, what we're looking at now?
Yeah, so first of all, let's be clear. This has nothing to do with Israel. This is Iran flexing its muscles and terrorizing the world. The ships that the Houthis have been firing at are American, they're Liberian, they're Chinese, they're from all over the world. They're not Israeli, and they're carrying goods that are not going to Israel. They're going to all over the world. So this is an attack not on Israel. It's an attack on the world. But at the same time, we have seen, especially in the last couple of months of last year, the Houthis began attacking directly into Israel, shooting missiles and drones into Israel with some success. And I think that is the question now. Is this going to remain contained to the Red Sea? Are they going to start attacking the Israelis again? And what does that do where Israel has largely had a ceasefire for the last several months? Or do the Houthis escalate beyond just those two options? You know, there was a war between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates between 2014 and 2018. That included the Houthis shooting missiles and drones into the kingdom, into the Emirates, hitting some really substantial targets, showing that they really have the reach to hit the whole region. So how widely will they respond? And is the Trump administration, is the United States ready to protect our allies in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE? I think that's what we're going to be watching next.
Yeah, a lot of questions still left to be answered in terms of this region. And you mentioned another different point of tension, a point of friction in terms of Yemen, in terms of the Houthis. Anything else, Blaze, that you would want to add? Because it's so very interesting. What else are you watching over the next several weeks to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think really the question is, what exactly has the United States been able to hit, and how systematically are we able to keep going after those targets in Yemen? I think, you know, the analogy here that I look at is Israel's success against Hezbollah in Lebanon, this terrorist group that everyone said was there to stay, that couldn't be defeated, that was so strongly armed. And yet in a matter of weeks, Israel was able to take them apart by killing their leadership and eliminating most of their weapons by having the intelligence of knowing where to hit. And I think that is the question. Does the United States have the intelligence to find the high-value targets, and will it continue to go after them day after day, week after week, until this group cries uncle? It can't just be one weekend. It can't just be 1 week. It has to be until this group falls apart.
Yeah, that is a commitment both financially and beyond that we'll see what happens in the region. All right, Blaze Misdal, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and everything you do at GINSA. We appreciate
There you have it, you guys. And you heard them say that Israel had picked them apart, talking about Hezbollah. And now we're seeing the United States addressing the Houthis, and we're going to be seeing where we go from here. And that particular video clip coming out from Live Now with Fox says the U.S. warships are currently shooting down Houthi drones after airstrikes, and this coming after the Houthis are vowing retaliation now against the United States. Both sides saying things will be escalating. This is not declining, decreasing. They're both saying that things are going to intensify. Let's take a look at some more video footage coming out. This is all over the news today. March 16, 2025. A lot coming out between the United States and the Middle East. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Joining me now with more on all of this is Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. He is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Maria.
First, I want to get your take on what you just heard from Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary. Where do you see the priorities in terms of President Trump's executive orders and what you can do as a leading senator in terms of codifying those into law so that they cannot be undone in 4 years?
Well, Maria, first, I'm glad we closed out last year's business on Friday, passing spending bills that will keep the government funded through September. Chuck Schumer really has no one to blame but himself. The Senate Appropriations Committee last year passed 11 of 12 spending bills. More than half of those were unanimous, and he didn't bring a single one up for a vote. So Chuck Schumer right now is reaping what he sowed last year. By finishing out last year's business, it allows us now to move on.
With Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea. What do you want to say about the last night's Yemeni strikes and what that message is to Iran and how that intertwined relationship of the four hostile nations is different this time around?
Well, what all of those adversaries want is to upend the United States-led order that has benefited our citizens for so long by keeping America safe and prosperous. The strikes against the Houthi rebels in Yemen last night was long overdue, going back to the October 7th attacks against Israel. They've been shutting down shipping in the Red Sea. That's dangerous not just for America's sailors who are there, but also it's bad for your wallet here in America. It drives up shipping costs, which drives up the prices you pay. Yet Joe Biden let our ships, let our sailors just sit in the Red Sea like sitting ducks. President Trump made it clear that it was long overdue. We're not going to allow it anymore. We're going to protect our interests. And he also made it clear to Iran that we know what they're up to. Where did a bunch of goat herders in Yemen get one-way attack drones and cruise missiles? They got them from Iran. So while we're degrading those rebels' power right now, we're also sending a signal to Iran that they need to knock it off. They also, as President Trump said to you last week, have to end their nuclear weapons program. We'd love to have a negotiated deal in which they surrender that program, but we can also do it, as he put it, the other way.
It seems to me that it was a serious message to Iran, but are you expecting retaliation?
Well, those rebels in Yemen have been striking shipping and been aiming at U.S. naval ships for some time. I suspect after last night they got the picture that Donald Trump is not Joe Biden. He's not just going to have our sailors on the Red Sea like sitting ducks. And if they continue these strikes, then he'll hit back even harder than he did last night. Same thing with Iran. You think they would have learned a lesson over the last 18 months after what Israel has done to Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon and directly to Iran with the United States support. But if they don't get the lesson, then of course I believe President Trump will strike back even twice as hard. And once again, the most important threat is the threat of Iran's nuclear weapons program. It's not just a threat to Israel or our friends in the Middle East. They're also building intercontinental missiles under the flimsy cover of a space launch program that could strike the United States in just a number of years. So this is a direct and imminent threat to the United States. That's why President Trump has said repeatedly, we're in the final days of this dispute over Iran's nuclear program. It's really up to them how it ends.
And Senator, what is China's role? How much of China's participation do you see here?
Well, China has been supporting Iran in numerous ways. For instance, for 4 years under Joe Biden, China bought Iranian oil in violation of sanctions against Iran. Joe Biden looked the other way. Donald Trump is not. He's imposed maximum pressure back on Iran. That's squeezing both Iran and China. But as I write in my new book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, their ultimate goal is to replace the United States as the world's dominant economic and military superpower. And that's why they continue to show up around the world supporting countries like Iran or North Korea or Russia, because they are trying to keep America on the back foot.
All right, we will leave it there. Senator, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being here.
There you have it, you guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And you heard him say that I think that the Houthis in Yemen got the message last night with those attacks from the United States as we had those strikes hit them, that this is not the same president that we've had for the past 4 years, that Donald Trump is a very different president than Joe Biden, is going to be handling this very differently. And he said, I believe they got the message. And if you believe that too, and you are glad to see Donald Trump in office and aggressively responding to this proxied-backed group, put yes in the comments or put a 47 in the comments. Now, if you think, no, they didn't get the message, they're going to be retaliating and things are going to be escalating here as they're threatening us, put a no in the comments if you think, no, they did not get the message. Yes or no or 47. Let me know your thoughts. And also, don't forget, take a second, hit that like button for me. But we're going to be seeing where we go from here because, as I mentioned to you, in the last 24 hours, we saw things escalate significantly. We are seeing Donald Trump issuing out these threats and then immediately responding with attacks. And now the Houthis are coming out and saying they're going to be hitting back as well. So we're going to see where we go from here. And also, you heard China, Russia, these other ones mentioned as well. And what we're hearing is that they are saying they are backing Iran to continue with the nuclear program, as the United States is saying no, they must be cut off. So our adversaries unifying together, potentially complicating things for the United States and trying to stop Iran from getting their hands on a nuclear weapon, which they said would be devastating. They would be the new version of North Korea. But with these proxy groups, there are more threats, not just against the United States, but also against Israel as well. So we will see. I will keep you up to date, but a lot happening today, March 16, 2025, with new developing news coming out in the past couple of hours, as we're hearing that these strikes have taken place. The U.S. said these strikes will continue to take place, likely over the past couple of days or the next couple of weeks. And the Houthis saying they're not just going to sit and take it, that there will be a swift retaliation. We will see. I will keep you up to date every step of the way. So that is the latest. And also, if you missed my previous videos, you might want to check them out, because a lot coming out on Social Security. The Social Security Fairness Act is issuing out, on average, $6,700, if I remember correctly, somewhere between $6,000 to $7,000 for those that were impacted from the Social Security Fairness Act with the WEP and the GPO elimination. Also, Doge dividend checks going out to American households. They're saying 20% of clawbacks. This is being proposed as the line item in the reconciliation bill being drafted right now. I actually had an exclusive interview with Mr. James Fishback, the CEO of Azoria, that is a part of Doge, that was the creator of this proposal. We're hearing that this is making its way through Congress as we speak, under consideration. And they're saying that if they reach their goal of $2 trillion, Doge's clawbacks, that checks could be going out in the amount of $5,000. Could be more, he said. Could be less. But it's going to be 20% of clawbacks. And they are trying to do that right now. And that also includes Social Security. And if you are a veteran of the United States, you are automatically included. He said you should be at the front of the line to get these checks, because you have paid into the system your entire life. Let me know again. If you are glad to hear it, drop a 47 in the comments. But there's a lot going on, and I'll continue to keep you guys up to date as more rolls out. I'll cite all the sources, put it on the screen, read right from it, so that way you can see it for yourself and know that it is the latest. And again, if you appreciate that, take a quick second, hit that like button, subscribe to stay up to date. It's totally free. Why not? And I'll keep you up to speed on everything. But that is the latest, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care. God bless. This is Steve.